on for a New Year's bouquet, a family of flowers.
There are almost 250,000 different species of flowering plant on the planet. More than 1 in 10 is an orchid. Orchids are the most widespread family of plants on Earth. The donkey's ear grows in Australia. Dracula flowers in the Andes in Peru. In the foothills of Everest, Pleone humilis grows from the rock. 7 orchid species actually grow north of the Arctic Circle. Britain alone has almost 50 species, and everywhere orchids need protection and conservation. Only 60 or so monkey orchids are left in southern England. While wild orchids are threatened, orchid rearing in the home is growing again in popularity. There are almost 50 orchid societies spread throughout Britain. The Royal Horticultural Society's Orchid Committee celebrates its centenary in 1989. The Society is the international authority in charge of the registration of new orchid hybrids.
It's the finest I've personally seen, Mr. Chairman, but perhaps other people have seen better. I don't know.
Phil, what do you think?
I think we saw a few approaching that in Tokyo. Whether they were, I don't think they were any better. They were not in such good condition, certainly.
Is this one that's just received Best Seven Species?
By the time the RHS committee first met, the collecting of orchids had already become a Victorian craze. This Phalaenopsis was bought for 100 guineas. That would be worth nearly £5,000 today. The books that came with Orchid Mania were lavish too. Lovely life-size paintings in a book called an elephant folio that weighed 38 pounds. Orchids, rare as they are, have an enormous potential for increase. This seed pod holds millions of dust-like seeds. Today, commercial orchid rearing is a high-tech business. Thousands of identical plants can be raised in micropropagation units, and growing, particularly the more temperate varieties, has come within the reach of everyone. The world's largest, and certainly the most comprehensive collection of orchids, is kept at Kew. The Royal Botanic Gardens holds over 5,000 species. That's about 1/6 of the world's total. The shaded glass houses behind locked gates have 8 different environments, controlled temperature and humidities. The climates run from temperate to the most tropical. This cockleshell orchid holds a particular interest for Kew's curator, John Simmons.
200 years ago, this very unusual orchid flowered at Kew, and it marked the beginning of a whole passage of thousands of orchids which came into cultivation. And this diversity of orchids fascinated people. You can see they live in so many different habitats. Behind us is a dendrobium, a forest orchid from Far East, which can grow up in trees, and orchids can grow up in trees. They perch up in trees, and they take their sustenance literally from the air and the water. And there are other epiphytes around here, which you can see, like the moth orchids. And here, another diverse group, the cymbidiums, which are growing in the ground. But perhaps the thing that bonds them all together, these unusual and unique forms, is the flower. There is something special about those 30,000 orchids. And the plan of orchids are common to all of them. Parts are like a lily's in threes, 3 lower petals, and 3 upper petals. And one of them curiously modified to attract insects and bring them into this part inside, which is, again, particular to orchids. It's a fusion of male and female parts called a column. Now, That is common to all orchids, no matter how bizarre, how unusual the flowers, and they're all highly modified to attract that insect pollinator. And in fact, they're so highly modified in so many ways that they seem to be almost playing with the insect, almost fooling the insect to do exactly what they want, because they want that insect to pollinate, to make seeds.
In Central America, the bucket orchid puts its little pollinating bee through an assault course before it can escape. The hammer orchids from Australia are pivoted to put the wasp in exactly the right position to pick up the pollen. Nearly through, and there are the pollinia, sticky masses of pollen ready to be carried to the next plant. With Dracula, the flower's adaptations for pollination are as bizarre as its name. The flower looks like dead meat, with the lip shaped and marked like a white fungus. Gnats are attracted to the tiny mushroom that quivers in a breeze. Some tropical orchids let their petals hang down like Rapunzel's hair. They're ladders for the pollinators to climb to reach the flowers. In return for carrying 2 rucksacks of pollen, some orchids give the insects a reward, a sweet sip of nectar. We have a taste for orchids too, and the flavour, like the family itself, goes round the world. The most popular flavouring for ice cream is vanilla. It's an extract from the seed pods of an orchid that grows like a vine. Vanilla is an important part of the economy of some Caribbean islands, and Trinidad is where George Black developed his passion for orchids. He is a member of the RHS Orchid Committee and has bred many hybrids in his greenhouses in Oxfordshire. George likes to follow an old Chinese custom and pollinate his orchids when the moon is new and the sap is rising. He has a pair of Cymbidium orchids about to be brought into the most intimate union.
Now what I'm about to do is what a bee would do, going into the flower, looking for the nectar. And it's when he's coming out that he comes in contact with the anther cap. And then we're going to hybridize this flower here, which has got a lovely color, and onto this one here, which is a larger flower. And as it's a pod parent that usually gives the shape and the size. Now we've got the pollen from Cymbidium Eastern Vale, which we're going to place onto the stigmatic surface of Solano Beach. We've just removed the pollen, and now we place the pollen onto the stigmatic surface and there we are. And that's the job done.
George Black's favourites are the Odontoglossums, the butterfly orchids. He bred and named this yellow and chocolate variety and called it Limbo Dancer. The flowers are smaller, and so are the pollinia, so the transfer has to be even more delicate. There's always a hope that this crossing will produce a winner, a variety to outshine the others. This complex hybrid, resulting from repeated crosses within 3 different orchid types, was judged best at the British Orchid Growers Association show in 1988. It was bred in Jersey at a foundation which holds the largest number of orchid hybrids in Europe. The Eric Young Orchid Foundation has a collection of nearly 1,000 Cymbidiums. Many of them have been recognised by the RHS either with awards of merit or the ultimate one, the first-class certificate. Alan Moon is the curator.
Well, I think this is a very exciting part of Cymbidium breeding. This is a species, Insigne Sandrae, had an FCC at the turn of the century. And by selecting the pink out of this, we produced this Cymbidium here, which is Rio Reiteradian here, which gained an FCC in 1939, and it was the only red of that particular cross. And from that, the next 50 years has produced this super Pontac variety Trinity, which we gained an award of merit from the RHS, and is probably the best red in the world now. So we're very happy.
The same kind of development has gone on in slipper orchids. These are Paphiopedilum species. Simple hybrids had been developed by the end of the 19th century. Today, selection for size and shape has led to these complex hybrids. Orchid breeding has become a question of taste and fashion. Motoniopsis species grow in South America. These hybrids are often called pansy orchids. Some people think the column and markings look like miniature ballet dancers. Wild Phalaenopsis were collected from dark forests in Southeast Asia. The Latin name means moth-like. Some of them are almost pure white, others delicately spotted, and selection for colour has produced pink varieties. One of the biggest events in the enthusiast calendar is the British Orchid Council's annual spring show. 1988 was the turn of the Cheltenham and District Society to act as host. Amateur growers from all over the country and beyond have made their floral pilgrimages. Orchids from Germany, orchids from professional growers. Precious cargoes, carefully cosseted and all selected to look their best. The main display area in the town hall is for amateur societies. Side rooms house the professional trade. It's a shop window for their wares, so they all put on dazzling displays, an orchestration of colour. There seems to be something almost luxuriously wicked about tropical orchids. In the Far East, there's a huge trade in orchids as cut flowers. All is ready now for the judging. Assessing the rarity, quality and condition of so many flowers is a daunting job. And all is ready too for the royal opening. When Princess Michael of Kent visits Kew Gardens, she always makes a beeline for the orchid houses. She's presented with a Russell Martin Cymbidium called Susan.
Orchids is something that I had a problem with. Somehow they seem to me to be a little plastic, perhaps a little unreal, somehow carnivorous even, and definitely parasite. And I didn't really take to them. And was sent to Belize. And when I left, the Prime Minister very kindly gave me quite a few tiny plants. And they were so delicate and so fragile, and keeping them alive was such a challenge that I began to read about orchids. And this started a fascination, and this fascination has grown and grown. So to come here to be the guest of the British Orchid Society and Cheltenham and District Orchid Society is a real pleasure for me. And now it gives me great pleasure to declare the Congress open. Thank you.
Rosettes for orchids. They might look more in place on the bridle of a prize bull. And there's still another test to come. In an anteroom, the RHS committee are about to start their monthly meeting. Under the chairmanship of the Honourable Alastair Morrison, the merits of all these hopeful presentations are about to be judged. The minutes of the last meeting are the pictures of orchids that were successful then.
Well, here we are. This is a historic occasion for the committee because this is actually the first time in our 99-year-old history. We haven't all been on the committee that long, I quickly add. 99 years, the first time we've met outside London. And I think that this is a forward-looking step, and I hope that we will, in future, meet on this kind of occasion as more or less as a matter of course. So let's get on with the business, shall we? Seed parent is Memoria Dr. Borg, pollen parent is Hamze, raised and exhibited by the Eric Young. There is an award of merit 1986 for the clone Trinity. Do people see this?
Alan Moon from the Eric Young Foundation has left the room while his Cymbidium is judged.
Super colour, a super mix of colours, actually. The flower, I don't know whether this is in the packing, but the flowers are very variable in shape, aren't they? Or perhaps these ones just aren't open yet.
This particular variety won best brown in Tokyo, in fact. Yeah, it's very fine for its breeding times.
Yeah. But could we take that second bottom one as the typical shape?
That's the way it ought to be.
That's the way it ought to be. Any proposals? Award of merit, those in favour? That is effectively unanimous.
It wasn't judged quite good enough for a first-class certificate, but will still be painted by the archivist, Cherry Ann Lavery. Her job is to match the colour and markings on each award-winning orchid exactly. This is now the definitive description of Cymbidium pontac. For the Kew herbarium, accustomed to dry and press specimens, the size and fleshy flowers of orchids presented a problem of preservation. Finely observed, perfectly drawn illustrations were the answer. And this is one of the earliest orchid colour plates. It's from a book published in 1757 and celebrates the first tropical orchid to flower in England, Bletia, a helleborine from the Bahamas. The second was Fias tankervilli from China. It's sometimes called the nun orchid because the upper petals, dark above and white below, look like a wimple. It was coaxed into bloom by a Mrs. Hurd who lived near Leeds in 1778. But it was this orchid, Oncidium papilio from Central America, which captivated the 6th Duke of Devonshire when he saw it in flower in Chiswick in 1833. Orchids had found a patron with enough wealth to fuel an obsession. The gardens at Chatsworth on the edge of the Peak District in Derbyshire already had some splendid features, like the Great Cascade. The 19th century was to see monumental developments that were to change the face of architecture around the world, and all from the need of tender plants to be sheltered from the cold winters of the north of England. The wealth of the 6th Duke of Devonshire was legendary. Tudor paintings and rare books lined the library. In the year when Victoria came to the throne, it was the Duke who paid 100 guineas for Phalaenopsis amabilis from the Philippines. That was about the annual salary of his head gardener, Joseph Paxton, whom he brought to Chatsworth. Paxton developed heated houses with differing climates, and very soon was acclaimed for his success in raising and flowering orchids. Calanthe orchids still flourish at Chatsworth. Indeed, they are used as Christmas decoration in the house. The present head gardener, Dennis Hopkins, who has worked at Chatsworth for 50 years, is showing the Christmas calanthes to the present Duke.
Well, Vici are these?
Yes, Grace. That's how it's the white one. I think we've had them since Paxton came.
You think as long as that?
Yes, as long as that, yes.
Of course, what doesn't reflect great patriotism on my family is that we kept enough heat to have a minimum stock of them going through 2 wars.
Yes.
Not so good.
No, not so good, that one. Well, we've built it up since then.
Yeah.
The 6th Duke never married. He was called the Bachelor Duke. He seemed to put all his energies into horticulture.
Of course, he was interested in gardening right across the board and sponsored great expeditions and goodness knows what. And he included calanthes in his collection of orchids. And indeed, the wooden frames of the pictures in the dining room have an orchid motif to them. I like to think that we've had orchids ever since 6th Duke and Paxton's time here at Chatsworth. They were a very strong combination, the 6th Duke and Paxton, and worked very happily together.
Paxton developed many skills at Chatsworth. As an engineer, he designed the Emperor Fountain, the highest gravity-fed jet of water in Europe. But it was as an architect of buildings designed to keep tender plants safe from winter frost that his genius is remembered. In the conservative wall, he grew one of the earliest Camellia reticulata plants from China. His major work, though, was the Great Stove House, the largest heated house for plants then in existence. It was demolished in 1920, but the outlines remain to give some idea of the scale. Queen Victoria drove in a carriage through these gates, with the plants illuminated by thousands of candles, when she came to admire the building and its contents. In an equally remarkable building at Kew, John Symonds again.
Paxton wasn't just interested in orchids. There were many other new and challenging plants to grow. One was the giant water lily from the Amazon. To do this, he had to build a completely new heat the water in. And when he became the first person in England to flower this remarkable lily, he was so excited, he took it to London and presented it to the Queen. Eventually, it was named after Victoria. Beyond this, though, he was a remarkable man. He saw in this plant, in these leaves, something that looked, with its structure, to be a low-bearing structure. And he trusted to the extent he put his young daughter, Annie, 7-year-old daughter, on that leaf, and she didn't sink. From this, he developed a whole thought on low-bearing processes, which he applied to buildings. And today at Kew, you can see in the remarkable structure of this leaf, those elements that support our greenhouses, and even in the motifs, there is Paxton's giant water lily.
His work was the start of structural engineering. Over the past 3 years, one of the most famous Victorian buildings, the Palm House at Kew, has had a multi-million-pound programme of rebuilding and renovation. It was designed by Decimus Burton, who worked and learnt from Paxton at Chatsworth.
If we look up at the roof behind us, you can see that in the very form of that ironwork, we have a repeat of nature's leaves, the structure of the leaf influencing the structural engineer. And at that time, these structures went on to be built all around the country. There were many more of these superb buildings.
In Liverpool, Sefton Park's Palm House has been closed to the public because the glass has become unsafe. This palm must be one of the tallest glasshouse plants growing anywhere, 87 feet to the ground. Liverpool played an important part in the Victorian orchid story, and the Parks Department can still put on a fine display of orchids in late winter, when many types of tropical varieties are in full bloom. Towards the end of Victoria's reign, the orchid craze was at its peak, and the rich merchants grew a range of tender plants in their smaller conservatories. Ship owners, traders, bankers all competed to buy rare orchids and camellias brought back by sea captains when Liverpool was a bustling trading port with the Indies, Americas and the Orient. Today, the docks and wharfs lie empty of shipping, and Liverpool has suffered a serious decline. The remains of what was the largest municipal collection of orchids in Britain are now kept in a suburban nursery of Liverpool Parks Department. They've been looked after for the last 30 years by Lawrence Maguire. Everyone knows him as Ollie.
There's been orchids in Liverpool since the 1880s when all the shipping companies used to grow and import them into the town, and then there was orchid nurseries in town that I generally like them because there's so much variation in them. Nothing's the same. Like, if we can just keep on our collection moving, like if we can get the backing of the public and that, there's hope for us yet.
The Sefton Palm House is in a sorry state. Over £1 million is needed for its renovation. Houses for people in Liverpool have had to come before houses for orchids. But it is a sad sight nonetheless, enough to make Charles Darwin weep if he could see it now. And he'd weep too at the measures that have to be taken to try and save Britain's increasingly rare and endangered wild orchids. These tiny vulnerable shoots offer a green glimmer of hope for the future. Lady slipper orchids were once widespread in the Pennines. This is the last wild plant left in Britain.
Hello?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Dear Grandma, happy birthday to you.
A voice like an angel.
You get more from a birthday greeting made by phone.
Your grandmother's very happy.
British Telecom. It's you we answer to.
Bonsoir, bonsoir. Oh, iceberg, eh? Girls always drink this when they're with me.
Yes, well, it's a really refreshing taste.
Or because it's alcohol-free, so they can drink it all evening without impairing their vision of my loveliness.
I think I prefer my theory.
Iceberg. Alcohol-free wine.
The Allied sale is now on with hundreds of extra special savings on carpets and curtains for the first 7 days. This lounge carpet's half price at £7.49 a square yard. This colour roll carpet's half price. So's this bedroom carpet, half price.
That's nice.
That's easy. These ready-made curtains are less than half price. And you can save a third on these made-to-measure curtains.
Don't miss the extra special savings for the first 7 days in the Allied sale.
Nice and easy does it at Allied.